What's happening, everybody? John Hendrix here, Saints News Network, alongside Ross Jackson. Happy July to everybody. It's hot. Hopefully you're staying cool, staying hydrated. I know it's miserable as soon as I walk out and check the mail and do anything that has the heat related. But Ross, how you holding up in all this craziness?
Good, man. Hot, but ready to be out in that heat for training camp. That's for sure. So, I'm hot and highly anticipatory, I think, are mine.
Yeah, it's going to toughen. Yeah, it'll toughen us up, right? Because we're out there at the heat. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit more indoor sessions this go around. But the reality is Saints training camp right around the corner. Veterans are coming in on July 25th. Rookies are a week before. First practice is on the 26th. Going to be kind of like non-padded. And then, there's tons of things that we're looking forward to seeing and stuff. And we're going to tackle all those types of things. But, look, we're starting this. We're talking about Saints training camp. Get ready. Almost 4 weeks away. I think one of the biggest things that we've talked about, Ross, is the cornerback position, specifically Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo, kind of the conundrum, a good conundrum, right? For the Saints to have, just going into this season. What a breath of fresh air. Because if everybody remembers where the Saints used to be in the secondary, you were praying. I think it tailed off when they lost Jabari Greer a long time ago. And then you had Tracy Porter still a little bit, but after that, you started chasing things and you just never had the right pieces in place and such. But, I always remember Jabari Greer and Tracy Porter being like the best cornerback tandem the Saints have had. And then, you go through all the struggle bus for years. You get Marshawn Lattimore. You fill things in with like King Crawley and Eli Apple and such. And then you finally get kind of a solution in Paulson Adebo. Let's start there. Maybe talk about Paulson's journey, because for those who don't remember, he sat out a year at Stanford, COVID, all that type of stuff. Then he came in and played football. This is a guy that I think did a lot of growing up pretty fast. But what's kind of your general assessment right now, Paulson, where he was and kind of where he's going in his career and where, maybe you see him going forward?
Yeah, look, I think he's an excellent corner. I think very highly of him. And just like my general takeaway around this whole battle is that the Saints are in a fantastic situation. This is kind of a good position for them to be in, where you have these two guys that are battling for this spot. And so to start with Paulson, he had an excellent rookie season, first game of his career going up against Aaron Rodgers, comes away with, a big takeaway in the red zone and all these other things. He, made a lot of plays at the catch point. He's a former wide receiver, so the ball skills are there. His ability to make plays at the catch point is absolutely there. His ability to anticipate wide receiver routes is absolutely there. All of the things that are kind of unique that maybe won't show up on the stat sheet, but lead to him showing up on the stat sheet, were there for him his rookie season. But this past year in 2022, we saw a little bit of a drop off. 111.1 passer rating surrendered to opposing quarterbacks, gave up 5 touchdowns, but struggled in terms of taking the ball away. Didn't walk away at all with any interceptions in those situations and things like that. And so I think he's a guy that, had a down year in 2022, but is still a very strong player and fits a lot of the same tenets and responsibilities that you expect in this New Orleans Saints team. So he's in line for the opportunity to have a big bounce back his third year. Maybe we saw a bit of a sophomore slump, but can he come back from that? I think is going to be the biggest question around him in training camp.
Yeah, and look, I think he had a good training camp last year. I think he was one of the ones, but then you remember it was the ankle, right? Or the foot, the injury that derailed him, because, look, this guy was looking great in one-on-ones. He was looking good overall. He's playing comfortable. They knew that they needed him a lot, and he was ready to step up to the plate and such. And I think Chris Richard did a really good job with him as far as coaching goes. But then, the injuries, and then I think his first game back was Minnesota. He gets kind of lit up a little bit. I mean, that game was all sorts of wrong. We were there in London, right?
Yeah, that was a wild situation.
and stuff. And so it's just one of those things in where, and Paulson, and you kind of talked about it being former wide receiver. He does play a little bit more aggressive style, right? I mean, and it's kind of, I don't want to put him in the Brandon Brown, but he's more physical corner. He's somebody who's going to try to jam you off the line, somebody who's going to play a little bit more handsy and such, which leads to, it's probably more beneficial for a wide receiver because he's going to get called for holds or anything like that, PI and such. But look, I think you look at last year, he was good in training camp. He was somebody that came back, had to battle injury. And I mean, I think it was one of those guys where you look at it kind of all season, it was just kind of a lingering thing because those ankle injuries and foot injuries, man, you can kind of get back to 100%, but sometimes you're just not 100% there. But, just Yeah. But you've talked to Paulson a lot in the locker room, and we all have. But, what have you gathered from him and his kind of mindset and just kind of where, you've seen the maturation process and, give fans some encouragement because this is a pretty big deal. Him, and we'll get into Alontae Taylor here in a second, but, fans are really kind of closing his door quick on him. Why shouldn't they?
Yeah, and far too quickly, if we're being honest. Like that, there's no reason to close the door on Paulson. You're right. Paulson and I have had a lot of conversations in the locker rooms and everything like that, and he has been very, very reliably the guy that has, the things that make good corners. He's, like you mentioned, he's extremely physical, but he's also extremely confident, has that short-term memory. He'll, if he gives up something, he'll go and get something back. And that's always kind of been who he is. And I think one of the other things that makes him so special is the above the shoulders football aspect of it. He and I kind of having some conversations around man match coverages and zone match coverages and kind of these in between blend of zone and man coverages that you see across the NFL that require corners to kind of sit back and watch things develop. Like he can describe all that, even though he's not asked to do that a ton. It's a very man-driven system in New Orleans. And I'll mention real quick, the 111.1 pass rating that he surrendered last year was in man coverage, and zone coverage was 143.6. So the scheme versatility didn't even work in his advantage last year, but we watched him fight through all of it all throughout the season. So I think one of the things that you always look for in corners is a tenacity and an ability to be able to erase mistakes. I think both of these guys do that, but Paulson going into his third year in the NFL is going to have a little bit more experience doing it at a higher level and has found a lot of success doing it at a higher level. He's one of my favorite guys to talk to in the locker room because he is always ready for what's next. And that's a quality that you just can't erase from a guy.
Yeah, there's a lot to appreciate because I think when a lot of people in the locker rooms, when you talk with them in a media setting where there's like 15 cameras around and stuff, it's totally different than actually just talking to the player, just casually conversating with them. I know guys like that, they just tend to open up a little bit more, talk a little bit more sometimes with that and such. So I know there's things like that are going to be on the horizon for all these players, and I'm excited to meet a lot of those guys and grow those relationships more. But with Paulson, I just feel like, again, I'm with you. I think he gets a bum rap in some aspects. And again, you look back at where the track history was. I mean, this guy right now, he is the solid guy that right now he's number 2, right? Marshawn's 1. He's number 2. We've seen that in OTAs, mini camp, training camp. I don't expect anything less than Bradley Roby's in the slot and such, but now you're looking at a guy like Alontae Taylor, rookie. And again, remember Alontae Taylor pick. And for those who forget, almost everybody ridiculed that pick. Said, why would they waste a pick on a guy with special teams? But you saw him being a sponge. He wasn't afraid to back down from a challenge or anything. This is a guy that came in, he had a little bit of struggles. He also dealt with the injury bug and stuff, but you love the swagger he played with. You love the confidence he played with. I think it was one of those things where you look at Alontae Taylor, again, he was a breath of fresh air. And then suddenly you're saying him and the Bradley Roby and even guys like Chris Harris Jr. on the field. It's like, man, this is not a bad spot to be in without Marshawn Lattimore. And Taylor had to start a few games. He played with the best of them and such. But, talk about Alontae Taylor, what you saw from him from day one to where you see him kind of now.
Yeah, I mean, just supreme confidence is the role of Alontae Taylor. He's not the biggest corner. Paulson Adebo comes in at 6'1" in terms of height, 6'1", and then you've got Alontae Taylor who hovers around 5'11" or so. And one of the things that he talked to me about when we were kind of discussing was after the Arizona Cardinals game, we were kind of talking about that game for him because it was kind of his big debut. He was going up against DeAndre Hopkins and Zach Ertz and some of these very skilled veteran pass catchers in the NFL. And he had a play that didn't go to him. It actually was a 30-yard gain to Rondale Moore, but he made the tackle on the play. But he was guarding Zach Ertz, and Zach Ertz kind of did this out and up double move, and Alontae kind of, was able to kind of bite on the double move to work himself in position to potentially make a play there because he trusts his speed and ability to be able to recover against a guy like Zach Ertz as he works his way back up the field. So he could make the calculated decision of, let me be in position to potentially make the first play because I can catch up on the second play. And then he actually ends up making the third play, which was the run and catch by Rondale Moore. He's the guy that makes the tackle downfield. So you love the pursuit, the tenacity, like we were just talking about with Paulson Adebo. He's also very physical, just like Paulson is. We have there's that great rep of him hand fighting with DeAndre Hopkins all the way downfield.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had him up until the ball was in the air within 5 yards. He had the physical contact with him all the way down, and you know, forced an incompletion there. And forcing completions is the name of the game for Alontae Taylor. 19% forced incompletion rate last year, number 1 on the team, and amongst the highest amongst players playing his position at the number of snaps that he played. 58.3 NFL passer rating when targeted last year. He was phenomenal. And so it's funny to kind of have this conversation, because you can say all these great things about Alontae Taylor, and then you can say all these negative things about Paulson Adebo, but it's only a 1-year sample. What do these guys look like in camp? And when do both of their highest potentials actually meet? Paulson Adebo's first year, Alontae Taylor's first year. What does it look like this year in training camp? But both massively impressive guys. And I know Alontae Taylor was impressive to you too, because we've talked about him a ton.
Yeah, look, I love seeing him play. And again, I like the confidence. And for a rookie to come in a big spot, I think it was reminiscent more of what Marshawn Lattimore did, right? And again, not saying he was the Lattimore at all, or, you know, because Paulson had some good moments as a rookie too. But, you know, I just think that you noticed it more. You noticed the effort. You noticed him being around the ball. You noticed him take to coaching. And it wasn't just that. He was also doing things on special teams too, and which seems like, oh, that's kind of boring, but special teams are necessary. There's a lot of times where he's having to play gunner and jammer. And I mean, again, those things matter in the NFL. That's why when people talk about special teams, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, this is the boring part of practice, but there's still a lot to learn, because most of the game is revolved around special teams, field position, all those types of things. And so, look, I think Dennis Allen had said it best, that he's playing with a lot of confidence. And I think there's a lot of guys right now in this roster that feel like they're playing a lot of confidence, but as of right now, you know, for Alontae, it may not translate to him being a starting guy, you know, week 1 potentially, or it may, depends, because training camp's a huge leap. But something that we learned it back at the combine was that the fact that they were going to put Alontae more in the slot to try him out, because I know a lot of people said, well, why don't they just put Alontae in the slot, because of, you know, he could maybe challenge Bradley Roby and such. What's the challenge for a guy like him, who's mostly a primary outside corner, to flip inside? Like, you know, I think because a lot of people talk about it, and Saints have had some good ones over the years. You know, I remember Malcolm Jenkins doing a lot of that. Kenny Vaccaro sometimes doing some of that, you know, but what are the big challenges of going into the slot and guarding against somebody?
Yeah, it's an entirely different game to go from the outside to the inside. And even Alontae Taylor said, like, look, I'm making a lot of mistakes. I'm an outside corner, but I'll do whatever it takes to help the team win and all that. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take more than just 4 weeks. This isn't a position that he played consistently throughout his rookie year. And if he was there, it was probably because he was motioned into the slot, not because he was deployed in the slot. In college, I think he played something like 44 slot snaps or something. It was very low. It was less than 100. Slot snaps throughout his collegiate career. So it's not just a situation where you say, okay, well, he plays cornerback, let's put him in the slot and everything will be fine. It's an entirely different game. And a couple of reasons for that are that, like, your space is entirely different. If you give up the sideline to a receiver out of the slot, that safety that's supposed to have your back is probably occupied by what's going on the outside and on the perimeter. And so all you're doing is giving up the sideline to a player. So you have to work everything. You have to be aware of where your help is, how you're able to do that, how you navigate in space. You're stuck in open space because players can release inside and outside with the same type of space because they don't have a sideline that they have to worry about taking snaps from inside the hash. You have to be, then you have a whole other part of the game that's unlocked for you that's not necessarily there for you as a perimeter corner. We know the Saints love having their perimeter corners who can contribute and run support, but it's not just contributing and run support. You're a main source of run support once you're playing in the slot. So now you have to learn run fits and all these other things. You have to learn a whole new language that maybe you don't have as a perimeter corner, or it's an entirely different degree. So the expectations in the role are just wildly different. This is a guy that's going to be rocking the number 1. He's got "I'm him" tattooed behind his ear. He's got all the confidence in the world to be able to be in the slot. And I think that having a guy like him that brings as much energy, brings that kind of attitude, all of that swagger, all of that to the slot can work out really well, because you have to be scrappy in that position. You have to be able to get mixy in those, up in those situations. And so if you're able to do that, then great, but you have to be able to show it. You can't just be deployed in game for the first time and say, okay, let's see what he can do. Training, if they want to do that, it's almost like you'd have to dedicate all of training camp to getting ready there. So that's a decision you have to make sooner rather than later. but it looks more like they're going to take the advantage here of having both these guys battle for the outside, which is I think a better use of their resources.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bradley Roby's really underrated in the slot. I think he does a good job, but obviously, as we've seen last year, and, injuries play a part of that. So sometimes they had to roll Justin Evans there, maybe somebody else, whatever the case may be. And so, again, it's one of those things where you talk about the depth of this team. I think it's pretty strong. I think it's one of the best depth they've had at corner and ever, right? And then, also not talking about other guys behind them, right? And so, look, I'm excited about seeing this at training camp. And what I think I'm happiest about is that you got joint practices with not just one team, you got them with two teams. So you're going to see the Chargers and you're going to see the Texans. And so I think there's a lot of things. And to be fair to a lot of people, which is tough with some of the PFF grades and some of those other things, that's a different rabbit hole. But without knowing what the call is and the assignment, it's always tough to just say, this person lost their coverage. They didn't lose, whatever the case may be, because it could have been the safety's responsibility. It could have been something else. It could have been communication. There's just so many factors that go in there. But, I think this is shaping up to be a really interesting battle. I think it's a really good problem to have for the Saints. But ultimately, how do you kind of see this thing playing out? I mean, do you think that when it comes to week 1, when they're playing against the Titans, Alontae Taylor is the guy who's starting in the slot or on the outside corner opposite of Lattimore?
I think it's going to be Bradley Roby in the slot still, unless Alontae Taylor, surprises them big time during training camp, or some other player like a Smoke Monday or a Jordan Howden does. I think there's a battle there for sure in the slot, but I don't know if it includes Alontae Taylor just yet. I think, honestly, what we're going to end up seeing in 2023 is a matchup-based deployment of Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor on the outside. I think that's the thing that it's unique, and not a lot of teams do it, but it's something that the Saints did in the slot a bunch last year, depending upon the style of receiver that was in the slot. Sometimes it was Bradley Roby. Other times it was the safety, Justin Evans. Yeah, Justin Evans that they deployed in the slot. And so they kind of mixed it up a little bit there based upon the matchup. Then when injuries hit, things kind of got a little bit more solidified. They had to go and grab Chris Harris Jr. off the street and get him there and all these other things. But I do think that, there is a real opportunity here to potentially mix and match these guys based upon the matchup that's presented. So week 1 doesn't become about who won the battle on the outside. It becomes who's the best matchup for that receiver. And maybe on a week-to-week basis, we start seeing something like that could be really interesting for the Saints defense to really maximize these players' ability by putting them in the best situations to succeed on a week-by-week basis.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because that's something they did last year, and they did it the year before. And I asked the question. I didn't get an answer from it, but I had noticed that they rotated series. Like Paulson would be in one, then Alontae would be in one, or even the year before, it was Adebo would be in one, and then Bradley Roby might be on the outside at one point. They did that in a lot of the games. And so I think you're right that this is probably going to be kind of and we'll have to see what the situation, I'm sure it depends on down and distance. It depends on scoring situation. It's a bunch of situational football. But again, I feel like both of these corners are ready to take another big step. And again, it's a huge thing to have, a good problem to have. And it's something Mickey Loomis had said, because we hadn't really talked about Marshawn Lattimore. They're banking on him being back to being the player that he was before. 100%. Injuries, bad abdomen injury, all those types of things that kept him out of the game for a while. And look, the Saints got by, and you think about it, it's like those last 8 games, 20 points or less, in all 8 of those. And they won half, and I'll get off my soapbox from that. But offense,
we didn't even talk about Sam Darnold's 2.8, 2.9 passer rating in Week 18. Yikes!
Yeah, it's crazy. But but again, you also look back last year. This is a team that expected to have, for all intents and purposes, a starting lineup of Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Marcus May, and Tyrann Mathieu. And how many times did we get to actually see that?
If you add Bradley Roby into that equation to get the starting 5, it's 0 snaps all season. 0 snaps that their entire starting secondary was out there. And that's massive, especially on the opposite side, where if you consider that Trevor Penning was supposed to be the starter at left tackle, which it looked like it was kind of trending that way during the preseason, they also didn't see a single snap with their starting offensive line out there last year either. So when you have that problem, then you add the secondary problem, which look, the Saints were still number 2 against the pass last year, which great on them. But man, if they were that without their personnel, imagine what they could have been with their personnel. And you have to be looking at that here in 2023 going, who is going to maximize that team's ability to be who they are as a secondary, their identity. And that's always Marshawn Lattimore. But now who helps on the opposite side of that? And that might be situational, as we're discussing here. So it's going to be really interesting. I think the secondary is really, the defensive back group is really interesting to watch for the Saints throughout training camp.
It's not, and not even the defensive back too, but I think the coaching, the way that the things have transgressed here is the fact that it was so bad for a while. And then they get Aaron Glenn back here, and then they bring back Dennis Allen, all that type of stuff. And then you had Chris Richard. Now you have 2 more secondary-minded coaches with Joe Woods and Marcus Robertson. I mean, and you still have DA again. Like I said, this is it just shows you how much attention they give to the position, because I'm always a big proponent that you got to get that pass rush going to help kind of to take the pressure off the secondary. Because if you don't give a quarterback but 2 seconds throw, or however a time window versus 5-10 seconds, then I think that's one of those things that you do, where I've heard other people say no, it means you have to have better secondary play. But I digress there. I think the pass rush, we've talked about it plenty, that is the most important thing that you can start getting going there and control the run, all that type of stuff. But you look at this Saints secondary, they brought in a lot of free agents, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of sticking with it. So they lost Daniel Sorensen, they lost Justin Evans, he went to Philly. PJ Williams hasn't been signed or anything, he's a free agent and such. And then you look at the secondary, they've got Jonathan Abram, they got Lonnie Johnson Jr. Isaac Yiadom was a guy who played some special teams they brought in late. He's been playing a little bit more. Ugo Amade is another one. Smoke Monday's back from injury and such, like you kind of pointed out. I mean, and then we haven't really talked about the rookie Jordan Howden, obviously, in this mix.
Troy Pratt Jr. got involved.
Troy, there's just like, it's just a good problem to have. But, when you look at maybe the final roster, do you think there's more room for a guy like a Smoke Monday here? Or do you think it's as simple as saying, okay, let's put together the way too early? I think it's Lattimore, it's a Debo. I think obviously it's Roby, and then obviously Taylor.
Right.
I think I would go a 5th cornerback possibly, or I don't know. I think it's
feels
Yiadom,
like Yiadom gets
I would pick.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and then the safety group, it's Tyron, it's Marcus May. Then you have JT Gray, who we didn't even talk about, right? But he's obviously there. He does more defensively. Then I think it gets interesting, because I think that, Abram, Amadi, and Lonnie Johnson Jr., but Howden, how do you pick out of that? What are you going to look at? But I think it's one of the most interesting battles of training camp. What do you think?
100% agree. It's so interesting, because the thing that makes guys like Jordan Howden and Smoke Monday so valuable would be their ability to be able to be multi-positional players. And that's what kept PJ Williams in the roster for so long, with the 97 one-year deals they gave him after his rookie contract and all these other things. Like, that was such an important piece to their defense, was having a guy like PJ that could do everything but take up one roster spot. And maybe that's the space where, especially Jordan Howden, we know for sure fits there. I asked Smoke Monday in the locker room at the last day of OTAs, or last day of media presence at OTAs, do they have you working in the slot? And he looked at me, he said, man, I'm doing everything. Like, they got me everywhere. And that probably included special teams too. And, one of the big things about Smoke Monday is that he is a downhill hard hitter. And when you're a good downhill tackler, that's usually a pretty good transferable quality to special teams, kick coverage, punt coverage, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's what becomes so key for those guys. But then you look at Lonnie Johnson Jr., can play corner, can play slot, can play safety. Ugo Amade can play slot, can play safety, can play special teams, and is a special teams kind of, ace-like player. You look at a guy like Jonathan Abrams, he can play multiple positions, split safety. He can be a guy down in the box for you. Maybe he's the one that's the most potentially limited in terms of versatility. So who's coming for that potential spot? But then he's got the connection with Derek Carr. Like, there's so many of these things, that so many factors to where it's not just, who's a good player makes the roster. It doesn't really work that way. There's so many different pieces. Who's good where, and how many different places does that list impact, that ends up being such a big part of the decision as well. And you have to potentially be ready for 3 games without Marcus May as well. So if that happens at the beginning of the season, the safety roster looks one way for 3 games, and then it looks the rest of the way for the next 14. So it's ever changing in terms of the responsibility situation, all that could be there.
Yep, and Marcus May's trial set for July 25th, stemming from a February 2021 DUI. So the stuff that happened in New Orleans, that stuff was dropped and such. Yep. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think what also makes this a challenge as we talk just about training camp, there's no more middle cut down. It's 90 to 53.
Wild.
That's a huge difference. And so in some aspects, I think that kind of bodes well somewhat for the Saints, because if they got some of these fringe players, especially in the secondary, I think priority could go to the practice squad for a lot of these guys. And obviously they didn't change much on the practice squad. There's going to be a lot of players on the practice squad. But, it's interesting how the NFL has just changed this landscape and such, and just to have the importance of the practice squad of just, instead of just having a few players here and there, and now you have up to 16, and, so a lot of those can be veterans, or 6 of them can be vets and all that stuff. But I think there's going to be a lot more of those secondary guys just because of how important the position is. But, I'm excited. I wish training camp was tomorrow, but it's not.
I know. Yeah, me too. Me too. Interesting thing. Like, I was just looking at the number. It's 37 players per club that get cut from 90 to 53 across 32 teams. That's 1,184 players that get, bad news after the final preseason game. And then 16 per team, right? 16 per team get some good news again. Yep. But man, it is a wild, it's going to be a wild cut down day this year with that change for sure.
Yeah, and we'll be here to cover it all, right? And so we're going to be talking about some of these positional previews, kind of some of the hottest ones that are coming here on Saints News. We'll be writing about it. We'll be there for training camp, obviously, every day that we can be and such, and as long as they'll have us, right? As long as it's open, we'll be there to the media. So they are going to scale back some fan attendance this year from everything that we've been told. So 9 were open, technically 10 because of the Superdome one that they had too. So probably scale back. I don't have an exact number. We should get that announcement sooner rather than later, probably closer to mid-July. But, man, I'm ready. I'm excited. Ross, any parting shots or thoughts before we get out of here talking about the secondary? I think we covered pretty much everything end to end there.
Yeah, no, it's a blast. And I think as fun as it is to talk about, it's going to be 10 times as fun to watch. So I can't wait.
Can't wait. Yep. One-on-one battles, all the fun stuff. And as soon as they get those first couple, we're like, all right, we're ready. We're back. So, guys, thanks for tuning in as always. Keep up with all of our written work, Saints.media. And then obviously follow Ross Jackson. Ross, how can they check out all your work on Locked On?
Easiest way to do it is just follow on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA, NOLA. It's easy for a little while. We'll see what happens with Twitter. But that's going to be the easiest way to follow for now. And then we'll figure out new ways and new ventures here soon.
Well, don't forget, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, all that other stuff. I mean, so, we'll be here. So some way, form or fashion, we'll always be here. So just check us out, si.com/NFL Saints or Saints.media. I'm John Hendrix for Ross Jackson signing out. Enjoy your weekend.